CEO stumbles into her room, sees her changing, and falls head over heels. A love story to remember. Welcome back to Love Scene Diaries, where we bring you the most captivating tales of love, heartbreak, and redemption. Today's story is one you won't forget. A chance encounter that changes two lives forever. Stay with us until the end, because this one is full of twists, emotions, and a love that defies all odds. The rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the glass windows of the luxury high-rise. Inside, Adrian Blackwell, the powerful and enigmatic CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, strode through the dimly lit hallway, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His phone was pressed to his ear, his deep voice sharp and commanding as he negotiated a high-stakes business deal. "Delay the merger? Absolutely not," he barked, his tone clipped. "We're closing this by tomorrow, no exceptions." But even as he spoke, his mind was elsewhere. The weight of the day pressed heavily on him. Endless meetings, looming deadlines, and the suffocating loneliness of his meticulously controlled life. He reached into his pocket for his keys, only to realize they weren't there. A frustrated sigh escaped his lips. "Hold on," he muttered into the phone, cutting the call short. His eyes scanned the hallway, his usual precision faltering. He was certain he'd left his spare key with the concierge, but in his rush, he'd forgotten to pick it up. The rain outside mirrored his inner turmoil, a storm brewing both inside and out. Distracted and impatient, Adrian spotted a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. Relief washed over him. Finally. He pushed the door open, stepping inside without a second thought. But the moment he crossed the threshold, everything changed. Inside the apartment, the air was warm and faintly scented with lavender. The space was a stark contrast to Adrian's sterile, minimalist penthouse. Here, vibrant paintings leaned against the walls, and half-finished sketches were scattered across a wooden table. It was a world of color and chaos, so unlike his own. And then he saw her. Celeste Moreau stood in the center of the room, her back to him, mid-change. She was slipping into a loose sweater, her bare shoulders illuminated by the soft glow of a nearby lamp. The sound of the door closing behind him made her freeze. Slowly she turned, her wide, startled eyes meeting his. Adrian froze, too, his usual composure shattered in an instant. For the first time in years, he was at a loss for words. His breath caught as he took in the scene before him, her unguarded beauty, the vulnerability in her expression, the way her hair fell in soft waves around her face. He started, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Celeste's cheeks flushed as she quickly grabbed a nearby scarf to cover herself. "Who are you? What are you doing in my apartment?" she demanded, her voice a mix of shock and confusion. Adrian's mind raced. "This isn't my apartment." The realization hit him like a freight train. He had walked into the wrong room. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "I thought this was... I didn't mean to..." Talif's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained up. "You thought this was your apartment?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Adrian said, his voice low. "It was a mistake. I'll leave right away." But neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension, an unspoken connection sparking in the silence. Adrian couldn't tear his eyes away from her, and Celeste, despite her initial shock, found herself strangely intrigued by the man standing before her. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The rain outside continued to fall, the sound muffled by the walls of the apartment. Adrian, the man who was always in control, felt his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. And Celeste, who had spent years guarding her heart, felt something stir within her. A curiosity, a pull she couldn't quite explain. Neither of them knew it yet, but this accidental encounter would change their lives forever. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable love stories. The rain had stopped by the time Adrian Blackwell returned to his penthouse, but the storm inside him raged on. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city skyline, the lights of the bustling metropolis below reflected in his glass of whiskey, untouched in his hand. His mind replayed the moment he had walked into that apartment, the warmth of the room, the chaos of the art, and most vividly, the woman who had stood there, startled yet captivated. Adrian Blackwell was a man who thrived on control. Every aspect of his life was meticulously planned, from his perfectly tailored suits to the empire he had built from scratch. Blackwell Enterprises was his pride and joy, a tech conglomerate that had made him one of the most powerful men in the city. But power came at a cost. Adrian's rise to the top had been anything but easy. Born into a modest family, he had clawed his way out of poverty with sheer determination and an unrelenting work ethic. His success was a testament to his discipline, but it had also left him emotionally guarded. Years ago, he had been in love, deeply, recklessly in love. But that relationship had ended in betrayal, leaving him with a scar he refused to acknowledge. Since then, he had convinced himself that love was a distraction, a weakness he couldn't afford. His life revolved around work. His penthouse, though luxurious, was cold and impersonal, a reflection of the man who lived there. The walls were bare, the furniture minimalist, and the only sound was the hum of the city below. Adrian avoided personal questions, deflecting with charm or silence. To the world he was the epitome of success, but behind closed doors he was a man haunted by loneliness. And yet, for the first time in years, something had shifted. The image of Celeste Moreau lingered in his mind, uninvited and unshakable. Across the city, in a cozy apartment filled with light and color, Celeste Moreau sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sketches and paintbrushes. Her hands were smudged with charcoal and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. She stared at the canvas in front of her, but her mind was elsewhere. Celeste was an artist in every sense of the word. Her world was one of creativity and emotion, a stark contrast to the rigid structure of Adrian's life. She worked as an interior designer by day, transforming spaces into works of art, and spent her nights painting, sketching, and dreaming. Her apartment was a reflection of her soul, vibrant, chaotic, and full of life. But beneath her free-spirited exterior, Celeste carried her own scars. She had always been fiercely independent, a trait born out of necessity. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and she had learned early on that she couldn't rely on anyone but herself. Her past relationships had only reinforced this belief. Time and again, she had opened her heart, only to have it broken. Her last relationship had been the most painful. She had fallen for someone who had promised her the world, only to leave her feeling small and unimportant. Since then, she had thrown herself into her work, using her art as a way to heal, but no matter how many canvases she filled, the ache in her chest remained. Celeste had built walls around her heart, determined to protect herself from further pain. She told herself she didn't need anyone, that her art was enough. But deep down, she longed for a connection, a love that was real, honest, and lasting. And then, Adrian Blackwell had walked into her apartment. The encounter had been brief, but it had left an impression on both of them. Adrian couldn't forget the way Celeste had looked at him, startled, yes, but also curious. And Celeste couldn't shake the image of Adrian standing in her apartment, so out of place yet strangely magnetic. They were opposites in every way. Adrian was disciplined, calculated, and guarded. Celeste was spontaneous, emotional, and open. He thrived in the corporate world while she found solace in creativity. But beneath their differences they shared a common pain, a fear of vulnerability born from past heartbreaks. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Adrian and Celeste are two halves of a whole. Their meeting was no accident, it was fate's way of bringing them together. The theme of the story is simple yet profound. Love often finds us when we least expect it, and it has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Adrian, who had spent years building walls around his heart, would learn that vulnerability is not a weakness but a strength. And Celeste, who had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone, would discover that love doesn't have to mean losing herself. It can mean finding someone who sees her for who she truly is. Their journey would be anything but easy. They would face misunderstandings, external pressures, and their own fears. But in the end, they would come to realize that love is worth the risk, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most beautiful stories. The next morning, Adrian Blackwell stood outside Celeste Moreau's apartment door. his hand hovering over the doorbell. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down ruthless competitors, this moment felt strangely daunting. He had spent the entire night replaying the accidental encounter in his mind, unable to shake the image of her startled yet captivating expression. He took a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. Inside, Celeste was in the middle of organizing her sketches when the chime echoed through her apartment. She frowned, not expecting anyone. Opening the door, she was greeted by the sight of Adrian, looking uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "Good morning," he said, his deep voice softer than she expected. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I didn't mean to intrude." Celeste crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You mean when you barged into my apartment uninvited?" she teased, though her tone was more amused than angry. Adrian's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Yes, that. It was a mistake, I thought it was my apartment." Her eyebrow arched. "Do you make a habit of walking into random apartments, or was I just lucky?" He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "You were lucky," he said, his tone laced with dry humor. "I don't usually make mistakes like that." Celeste studied him for a moment. There was something disarming about the way he stood there, this powerful CEO who seemed so out of place in her colorful, chaotic world. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, and despite herself, she found his discomfort endearing. "Well, apology accepted," she said finally, stepping back to close the door. But before she could, Adrian hesitated. I also wanted to say that your apartment is unique. It's not what I expected." Celeste tilted her head, intrigued. "And what exactly did you expect?" Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but it certainly wasn't the vibrant, art-filled space that seemed to reflect her personality so perfectly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it suits you." For a moment their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to shift. There was something unspoken in the silence, a connection neither of them fully understood yet. "Thank you," Celeste said softly, her voice losing its teasing edge. Andrea nodded, stepping back. "Have a good day, Ms. Moreau." "You too, Mr. Blackwell." As the door closed, Celeste leaned against it, her heart beating just a little faster. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was something about him that intrigued her. Over the next few weeks, their paths seemed to cross with increasing frequency. It started with a chance meeting in the lobby of their apartment building. Celeste was juggling a stack of art supplies when Adrian, on his way to a meeting, stopped to hold the elevator for her. "Thank you," she said, slightly breathless as she stepped inside. Adrian nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Big project?" he asked, gesturing to the supplies. "Something like that," she replied, her tone light. "And you? Off to conquer the world?" He smirked. "Something like that." The conversation was brief, but the tension between them was palpable. Their next encounter was at a nearby cafe. Celeste was sketching by the window, lost in her work, when Adrian walked in. He spotted her immediately, hesitating for a moment before approaching. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding his coffee. Celeste looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Sure," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. Their conversation was casual at first, small talk about the weather, the city, and their favorite coffee orders. But as the minutes passed, the walls between them began to crack. Adrian found himself drawn to her warmth and authenticity, qualities so rare in his corporate world. And Celeste, despite her initial reservations, couldn't help but be intrigued by the man behind the polished exterior. The turning point came at a charity gala a few weeks later. Celeste had been invited to showcase her designs as part of a fundraiser for local artists. She was nervous, unsure how her work would be received by the high society crowd. Adrian, who was attending as a sponsor, spotted her from across the room. She looked stunning, her usual casual style replaced by an elegant dress that still managed to reflect her unique personality. "Miss Moreau," he said as he approached, his voice warm. "Your work is impressive." Celeste turned, surprised to see him. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he replied, his gaze steady. But I'm glad I did. Their conversation that night was different, deeper, more personal. Adrian opened up about his admiration for her creativity, and Celeste found herself sharing stories about her journey as an artist. For the first time, they saw each other not as strangers from different worlds, but as two people with their own struggles and dreams. Despite their growing connection, both Adrian and Celeste were hesitant to act on their feelings. Adrian was drawn to Celeste in a way he hadn't been to anyone in years. Her authenticity and warmth were a stark contrast to the cold, calculated world he inhabited. But he couldn't ignore the fear that came with vulnerability. He had spent so long building walls around his heart, and the idea of letting someone in, especially someone as unpredictable as Celeste, terrified him. Celeste, meanwhile, was equally conflicted. She couldn't deny her attraction to Adrian, but his high-powered lifestyle felt incompatible with her values and independence. She had worked hard to build a life on her own terms, and the thought of losing herself in a relationship, especially with someone like Adrian, was a risk she wasn't sure she was willing to take. Their interactions were charged with unspoken tension, a lingering glance, a brush of hands, a shared laugh. Each moment brought them closer, yet the barriers between them remained. What would you do if someone from a completely different world captured your heart? Share your thoughts below. The night of the charity gala had been magical, but the morning after brought a storm neither Adrian nor Celeste had anticipated. Adrian sat in his office, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the headlines on his tablet. The photos were everywhere. Him and Celeste at the gala standing close, their smiles warm and genuine. The tabloids had spun the story into a whirlwind of speculation. Billionaire CEO's secret romance with local artist. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from his PR team. When he finally answered, his head of public relations, Vanessa, wasted no time. "Adrian, this is a disaster," she said, her voice sharp. "The board is already asking questions. We need to issue a statement immediately." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "A statement about what?" "There's nothing to explain." "Exactly," Vanessa replied. "We need to make it clear that this, whatever it is nothing. You can't afford a scandal right now, not with the merger on the line. The investors need to see you as focused and untouchable, not distracted by some—" "Careful," Adrian interrupted, his tone icy. Vanessa hesitated, then softened her approach. "Adrian, I'm just saying this could hurt your image. You've worked too hard to let something like this derail you." Adrian ended the call without responding. He stared at the photo on his screen. Celeste, radiant and confident, standing beside him. For the first time in years he had felt something real, something that made him question the life he had built. But now, that life was threatening to pull him back into its cold, calculated grip. Meanwhile, Celeste was blissfully unaware of the media frenzy. Until she wasn't. She had been working in her studio when her phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "You're famous. Check the news." Confused, she clicked the link and was greeted by the same photos Adrian had seen. Her heart sank as she read the headlines. Her initial reaction was a mix of shock and disbelief. She hadn't asked for this attention, and the idea of being dragged into Adrian's high-profile world made her stomach churn. But what hurt the most was the thought that Adrian might see her as a liability. Her fears were confirmed later that week, when she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Celeste had stopped by the apartment building's lobby to pick up a package when she spotted Adrian talking to a man she recognized from the gala, his business partner, Richard. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried across the marble floor. "This thing with the artist," Richard was saying, his tone dismissive. "It's a distraction, Adrian. You need to cut it off before it becomes a problem." Celeste froze, her heart pounding. "I know," Adrian replied, his voice low. "I'm handling it." Celeste didn't wait to hear more. She turned and walked away, her chest tight with a mix of anger and hurt. So that's how he sees me. A distraction. By the time she reached her apartment, tears were streaming down her face. She had let herself believe for just a moment that Adrian might be different. But now, it seemed he was just like everyone else, someone who saw her as expendable. Adrian, of course, had no idea what Celeste had overheard, but he could sense the shift in her demeanor the next time they crossed paths. She was distant, her usual warmth replaced by a polite coolness that cut deeper than he cared to admit. He wanted to ask her what was wrong, but the words never came. Instead, he buried himself in work, convincing himself that it was for the best. But late at night, when the city was quiet and his penthouse felt emptier than ever, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He replayed their conversations, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art. For years, Adrian had told himself that love was a distraction, a weakness he couldn't afford. But now he wasn't so sure. Celeste had awakened something in him, a longing he hadn't felt in years, and yet the weight of his responsibilities loomed over him like a shadow. Could he really have both? Could he balance the demands of his career with the vulnerability of a relationship? Or was he destined to choose one over the other? For Celeste, the days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. She threw herself into her work, hoping to drown out the ache in her chest. But no matter how many hours she spent sketching or painting, she couldn't escape the memory of Adrian's voice, the way he had called her a distraction. Her past relationships had taught her to guard her heart, and this was exactly why. She had let her walls down, and now she was paying the price. But it wasn't just Adrian's words that haunted her. It was the world he represented. His life was so different from hers, filled with power, wealth, and scrutiny. She had worked hard to build a life on her own terms, and the thought of losing herself in his world terrified her. Could she really trust him? Could she trust herself? Or was she better off walking away before she got hurt even more? The days turned into weeks, and the distance between Adrian and Celeste grew. They still saw each other in passing at the apartment building, in the lobby, but their interactions were brief and strained. Adrian wanted to reach out, to explain himself, but he didn't know how, and Celeste, still reeling from what she had overheard, couldn't bring herself to confront him. The tension between them was palpable, a silent battle of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. At its core, this conflict is about fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of losing oneself. Adrian and Celeste are both grappling with their own insecurities, their own doubts about whether love is worth the risk. But beneath the pain and the misunderstandings, there is a spark that refuses to die. What would you do if you overheard someone you cared about dismissing your connection? Would you confront them or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tension in Adrian Blackwell's life had reached a breaking point. For weeks he had been juggling the fallout from the media scandal, the growing distance between him and Celeste, and the mounting pressure at Blackwell Enterprises. But now, a crisis loomed that threatened to unravel everything he had built. The boardroom was silent as Adrian stared at the documents in front of him. The company's latest acquisition had uncovered a hidden scandal. One of the subsidiaries they were set to merge with had been involved in unethical practices. If Adrian moved forward with the deal, it would save the company millions and secure the merger, but at the cost of his integrity. If he pulled out, the financial repercussions could be catastrophic, and his reputation as a leader would take a hit. "Adrian, we need a decision," Richard said, his voice firm. Adrian's jaw tightened. He had always prided himself on his principles, but the weight of the company's future bore down on him. For the first time in years, he felt truly lost. That evening, instead of retreating to his penthouse, Adrian found himself standing outside Celeste's apartment. He didn't know why he was there, only that he needed to see her. Celeste was in her art studio, a small space she had rented a few blocks from her apartment. The room was filled with half-finished canvases, jars of paintbrushes, and the faint scent of turpentine. She was working on a new piece, her hands moving instinctively as she tried to channel the emotions swirling inside her. When the knock came, she hesitated. She wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted company, but something compelled her to answer. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see Adrian standing there, his usually composed demeanor replaced by a look of quiet desperation. "Adrian," she said, her voice soft. "What are you doing here?" "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted, his voice low. There was something in his eyes that made her step aside, gesturing for him to come in. Adrian stood in the middle of the studio, taking in the vibrant chaos around him. The room was so different from the sterile boardrooms and minimalist spaces he was used to, yet it felt oddly comforting. Celeste watched him carefully, sensing that he was carrying a heavy burden. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently. For a moment, Adrian didn't respond. He wasn't used to opening up, to letting anyone see the cracks in his armor. But something about Celeste, her warmth, her authenticity, made him feel safe. "There's a decision I have to make," he began, his voice steady but strained, "one that could either save my company or destroy everything I've worked for, and I don't know what to do." Celeste set down her paintbrush and crossed the room to stand beside him. "What's the decision?" Adrian hesitated, then explained the situation, the unethical practices, the pressure from the board, the potential fallout. As he spoke, Celeste listened intently, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "What do you want to do?" Adrian looked at her, surprised by the question. "I want to do the right thing," he said, "but the cost." "The cost of doing the right thing is always high," Celeste said softly. "But the cost of compromising who you are is even higher." Her words hit him like a bolt of lightning. For so long he had been focused on protecting his company, his image, his carefully constructed life. But in that moment he realized that none of it mattered if he couldn't live with himself. "You make it sound so simple," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's not," she admitted. "But sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that define us." Adrian nodded, her words sinking in. For the first time in weeks he felt a sense of clarity. As the tension in the room eased, Adrian's gaze shifted to one of the canvases on the wall, a vibrant, abstract piece that seemed to pulse with emotion. "Is this yours?" he asked, gesturing to the painting. Celeste nodded. "It's a work in progress." "It's beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. Celeste smiled, a hint of vulnerability in her expression. "Thank you." For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Adrian turned to her, his voice quieter now. "You know, I've spent most of my life trying to control everything, my career, my image, my emotions, but lately, I feel like I'm losing control." Celeste met his gaze, her own walls beginning to crumble. "Control is overrated," she said with a small laugh. "I've spent so much time trying to protect myself, to keep people at a distance, but it's lonely, isn't it?" Adrian nodded, his eyes softening. "It is." Taking a deep breath, he continued. "There was someone, years ago. I thought she was the one, but she betrayed me. After that, I told myself I didn't need anyone, that love was a distraction, a weakness. But then I met you." Celeste's heart skipped a beat. "Adrian, you make me question everything," he admitted. "The way you see the world, the way you live your life. It's so different from mine, but it's what I've been missing." Celeste felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long guarding her heart, afraid of losing herself in love. But Adrian wasn't asking her to change or to compromise who she was. He was simply asking her to let him in. "I'm scared," she confessed. "I've been hurt before, and I don't know if I can go through that again." Adrian stepped closer, his voice steady. "I'm scared too, but maybe we don't have to do this alone." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Celeste reached out and took his hand. "Maybe," she said softly. In that quiet, intimate moment, Adrian and Celeste found something they hadn't realized they were searching for. Hope. Their differences, once seen as barriers, now felt like strengths that complemented each other. Adrian's discipline and focus balanced Celeste's spontaneity and creativity, while her warmth and authenticity reminded him of what truly mattered. This emotional breakthrough marked the turning point in their relationship. They weren't just two people from different worlds. They were two people who had found a connection that made them stronger together. Have you ever had a moment where someone changed the way you see the world? Share your story in the comments below. Adrian Blackwell had always been a man of action. When he made a decision, he followed through with precision and determination. And now, standing in his office with the city's skyline stretching out before him, he knew exactly what he needed to do. For weeks he had wrestled with his feelings for Celeste, torn between his responsibilities as a CEO and the undeniable pull of his heart. But after their emotional breakthrough in her art studio, everything had become clear. He couldn't let her slip away, not without showing her how much she meant to him. Adrian had spent his life building an empire, but for the first time he realized that true success wasn't about power or wealth. It was about the people who made life worth living, and Celeste Moreau was one of those people. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Celeste had been working tirelessly on a new art project, a series of pieces inspired by the intersection of chaos and control, a theme that had taken on new meaning since meeting Adrian. She had submitted her work to several galleries, hoping for a chance to showcase it on a larger stage, but the responses had been slow and uncertain. Adrian, however, had connections. He knew the owner of one of the city's most prestigious galleries, a man who owed him more than a few favors, but instead of pulling strings behind the scenes, Adrian decided to take a different approach. At a press conference for Blackwell Enterprises, where reporters had gathered to hear about the company's latest initiatives, Adrian made an unexpected announcement. "Before we conclude," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "I'd like to take a moment to highlight a local artist whose work has deeply inspired me. Celeste Moreau is a visionary whose art captures the beauty of individuality and the courage it takes to embrace it. Her latest project deserves to be seen, and I'm proud to announce that Blackwell Enterprises will be sponsoring her upcoming gallery exhibition." The room erupted in murmurs, reporters scrambling to jot down notes and ask questions. Adrian ignored them, his focus unwavering. "This isn't about business," he continued. "It's about supporting creativity, passion, and the people who remind us of what truly matters. Celeste's work is a testament to the power of art to connect us, and I'm honored to play a small part in bringing her vision to life." The announcement made headlines within hours. Adrian's name was splashed across every major news outlet, not for a corporate deal or a financial milestone, but for his support of a local artist. It was a bold move, one that risked raising eyebrows among his investors, but Adrian didn't care. For the first time in years, he was doing something purely for someone else, someone who had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. When Celeste saw the news, she was stunned. She had been in her studio putting the finishing touches on one of her pieces when her phone buzzed with a flood of messages. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers were reaching out to congratulate her, to tell her how incredible it was that Adrian Blackwell had publicly supported her work. At first, she didn't know how to feel. Part of her was overwhelmed by the attention, unsure if she was ready to step into the spotlight. But as she watched the video of Adrian's announcement, her heart swelled with emotion. He hadn't done this to control her or to pull her into his world. He had done it to lift her up, to show her that he valued her independence and dreams. It was a gesture of selflessness, one that spoke louder than any words ever could. For so long, Celeste had been afraid of losing herself in a relationship. But Adrian's actions proved that he didn't want to change her, he wanted to celebrate her for exactly who she was. That night, as she stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the fabric of a sleek black dress, Celeste made a decision. It was time for her to take a leap of faith. The gala was a glittering affair, held in the grand ballroom of one of the city's most luxurious hotels. Adrian was there, of course, surrounded by investors, executives, and socialites, but despite the crowd, his mind was elsewhere. He hadn't heard from Celeste since the press conference, and though he had told himself he didn't expect anything in return, a part of him couldn't help but hope. And then he saw her. She entered the room with quiet confidence, her dress hugging her figure in all the right ways, her hair swept up to reveal the delicate curve of her neck. She was stunning. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught Adrian's attention. It was the way she carried herself, with a grace and authenticity that set her apart from everyone else in the room. For a moment, Adrian couldn't move. He watched as she scanned the crowd, her eyes searching until they found his. When their gazes met, the noise of the room seemed to fade away. Celeste made her way toward him, her step steady and deliberate. When she reached him, she smiled. A soft, genuine smile that made his chest tighten. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I wanted to," Adrian replied, his tone equally quiet. "You deserve it." Celeste studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she reached out and took his hand. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of what it would mean to be with someone like you. But you've shown me that I don't have to lose myself to let someone in, and I want to try. If you're willing to meet me halfway." Adrian's heart swelled with emotion. "I'll meet you wherever you are," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. For the rest of the evening they stayed by each other's side, their connection stronger than ever. Adrian's grand gesture and Celeste's leap of faith marked the culmination of their journey. It wasn't about one of them changing for the other. It was about finding a balance, a way to support each other's dreams while staying true to themselves. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real, and in the end that was all that mattered. Have you ever taken a leap of faith for love? What inspired you to take the risk? Share your story in the comments below. The months that followed Adrian's grand gesture were a whirlwind of change, growth, and quiet moments of joy. For the first time in years, Adrian Blackwell allowed himself to slow down, to savor the life he had built. Not just the empire of glass and steel, but the connections that made it meaningful. And at the center of it all was Celeste Moreau. Celeste, too, found herself stepping into a new chapter. Her gallery exhibition, sponsored by Blackwell Enterprises, had been a resounding success, drawing attention from critics and collectors alike. But more than the accolades, it was the knowledge that Adrian had believed in her, had seen her for who she truly was, that gave her the confidence to embrace this new phase of her career. Their worlds were still different, but they had learned to navigate the spaces between them. Adrian made time to visit her studio, often arriving in his tailored suits and rolling up his sleeves to help her stretch canvases or clean brushes. Celeste, in turn, attended a few of his corporate events, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder that she was there not as an accessory, but as an equal. They didn't try to change each other. Instead, they found ways to grow together, their love becoming a source of strength rather than conflict. The final scene unfolded at a charity gala, one that Celeste had helped organize to support local artists. The ballroom was filled with laughter and music, the air alive with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Celeste stood near the edge of the room, watching as guests admired the artwork on display. She wore a flowing emerald green dress, her hair swept to one side, and she radiated a quiet confidence that made Adrian's heart skip a beat when he spotted her from across the room. He approached her with a glass of champagne in hand, his smile warm and unguarded. "You've outdone yourself," he said, his voice low. Celeste turned to him, her eyes sparkling. "I had a little help," she replied, her tone teasing. Adrian chuckled, offering her the glass. "Care to take a break from being the star of the evening?" She accepted the champagne, taking a small sip before setting it aside. "What did you have in mind?" He extended his hand, his expression soft. "Dance with me." Celeste hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. He led her to the center of the room, where the music shifted to a slow, romantic melody. As they began to sway, the world around them seemed to fade away. Adrian's hand rested gently on her waist, and Celeste's fingers curled around his shoulder. Their movements were unhurried, their connection palpable. "You know," Celeste said softly, her voice barely audible over the music, "I never thought I'd find myself here." "Here at a gala?" Adrian teased, his lips curving into a smile. "No," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "Here with you." Adrian's expression grew serious, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Neither did I, but I can't imagine being anywhere else." For a moment they simply held each other, the music carrying them in gentle circles. Around them the guests watched with smiles, some whispering about how perfect they looked together. But Adrian and Celeste didn't notice. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was each other. As the music swelled, the camera panned out, capturing the couple in the center of the grand ballroom, their love a quiet but powerful force that seemed to light up the room. A voiceover began, soft and reflective. Love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your world. It's about building a new one together. It's about compromise, trust, and the courage to let someone in, even when it scares you. Because in the end, the greatest risk is also the greatest reward. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with a sense of warmth and fulfillment. Do you believe love can bridge any gap? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable love stories.